So I've been sent one of these HackMotion wrist sensors, and the cool thing is they've started their way at the top with the influential YouTube channels, and they've worked their way all the way down to me. And that means I'm not being paid for this. I've got no skin in the game. I can give you a really honest review from the perspective of my experience with it, the time I've spent with my students, and if you're familiar with the channel, I'm big on motor learning principles. This is going to be a really honest review. So the company basically sent it to me and said, give it a try it with your students, see if you like it, try it on your own game. If you want to do a video on it, do it. I mean, they were ever so good, not pushy at all. They gave me a 5% code if you want to buy one, but I mean, before we get into that, is this thing any good? And for who? Now, anyone who's ever had a lesson with me knows that I am a big fan of coaching aids. I'm always kind of in my coaching aid box trying to kind of find the right thing to target the move that the student needs most. I don't believe there is a coaching aid to fix all swing flaws, etc. But a really well targeted coaching aid really kind of helps us put a definite feel on our movement and reduces the thinking, and that's, you know, and gives us really accurate feedback. So in general, I think coaching aids are brilliant if they're well targeted. Okay, so what have we got here? We've got basically a sensor that sits on your wrist, kind of where your watch would be. And then the other part of the sensor, which gives us all the, I suppose, the combination of the two, gives us the wrist data. It sits on your glove, or it can strap to your hand. It's ever so simple to put on. I put it on my glove first, and then clasp that over, and it's done. There's a very quick calibration process, takes 2 seconds, brilliantly easy to use. But what does it actually do? So as you may imagine, the sensor is tracking your wrist positions all the way throughout your swing, but in particular at 3 key points. That is your address position, so it takes into account your grip and your kind of hand shape to start with, at the top of the backswing, and then down there at impact. And if you want to know more about how the wrists work in the swing and how they should work, then I'll link that in the description as well. But essentially, you know, there's up and down motion, this wrist hinge, and there's also flexion and extension of the wrists, as well as arm rotation. The flexion and extension of the wrists is what the entry-level HackMotion is all about, with the understanding that as the wrists are extended and flexed, that really changes the angle of the club face and one's ability to square it up at the bottom and also deliver some shaft lean and, you know, create solid strike and compression. So the HackMotion sensor comes in 3 levels. There's core, there's a middle one, and then there's the pro. The core version, which is about $300, gives you extension and flexion data, and it's all about that kind of sense of where the club face is. The next level up, it's about $500, I think, gives you putting, so that's quite cool, shows you what's going on with your putting. And then the top level, which is around $1,000, has radial ulnar, so up and down hinge, and also arm rotation. But they've tried to make it so that it's really kind of easy to use, easy to understand, and you don't need pro level understanding to make this kind of functional and effective. The core features of that entry-level model then are telling you where you are on a perspective of extension and flexion throughout the swing. So it will give you three kind of measures, if you like: setup, top of backswing, and impact, and it'll tell you whether you are in an acceptable range. So it's not kind of forcing you into, you know, one particular position. It's giving you some variability based on all their tour data, and it'll give you a very simple traffic light feedback. So it'll give you a green, orange, red light depending on where you are, etc. That's all very well knowing after the fact, but what about in the swing? What if in your swing you have this kind of pattern which is deeply unconscious, as many movement patterns are, and you've tried all kinds of things, you know, you're aware that you overly extend the wrist, but you can't fix it. Well, that's when you'd use the audible feedback to, as you make a slow backswing, it will give you a chime as to whether you are in or out of that range. And if you can build in more awareness into that pattern, that's how these things really change. So in my case then, I have a particular wrist issue which affects everything, and I fancy the HackMotion could be really handy. So my pattern, just very briefly, is I would move the hands away from me in my takeaway and get the club rotating this way. That would move the wrists into, that lead wrist into quite heavy flexion very early in the swing. It has a knock-on effect of how the shoulder loads and how the pelvis moves. You know, there's a big kind of chain reaction, so it's quite a big deal really. I'd love to get on top of that. I mean, I have tried many different ways of doing this. So I'd use the sensor, and I would preset a range of motion that I'm happy with, and an alarm that would notify me if my wrist went into flexion early on. That's my pattern. Can I get the club moving up and the arm rotating better? And I'd use that audible tone. So you can look into the graphs, and you can really kind of track the wrist motion, although it's quite subtle, and I suspect that's probably getting a little bit more detailed than it needs to be, and it is a little bit kind of after the event. So I quite like just bringing awareness to it with that audible tone, making very slow movements, building in that feel, and starting to connect it to a key feel for me. So it might be how the right shoulder feels, how this elbow feels, so that when we take the sensor off, we get that transfer of skill. Okay, so the sensor hasn't chimed, and what do I feel in my shoulder and my elbows? Okay then, verdict time. So pros and cons. I mean, first of all, it's an amazingly simple thing to use, very lightweight, doesn't interfere with your motion at all, so easy to set up and calibrate. I mean, it takes seconds, so incredible really. I think the company have done an amazing job with the education. On that basic level is all around flexion and extension, and it really kind of meets the student at the right level. You can then move on through the levels and and get more and more complicated. But for the basic end user, the regular golfer, I think they've done a great job with that. Cons then. Cons would be basic level $300, quite a lot. But then, if you've struggled with wrist issues over the years and struggled to fix it, maybe that doesn't seem so much for you. Maybe you could justify that. Other cons, ultimately, it is measuring stuff, and it is only measuring stuff. It's not putting you in a constraint or hasn't changed the task in any way to lead you to move differently. So you have to really pay attention to it, watch the feedback, lots of backwards and forwards, and really building awareness. Unlike some coaching tools, which kind of task you in a different way. So overall verdict then, I think it's an absolutely amazing product, but like all coaching tools or all training aids, it needs to be targeted. So if you fancy that you have had wrist issues one way or another and you want to fix them, particularly in the backswing, downswing, this is happening far too quickly to use the audible feedback. So you need to just measure it, try again, and ultimately find the source of the issue. But if you fancy that you've got backswing issues with the wrist that are really hurting your game, I think that is a brilliant device if it's targeted. If you're just using it to see if it improves your swing, then that's a bit of a swing in the dark. It may not help you. Now going forwards, now I'm on a roll and I'm doing these training aid reviews. This is one I bought, and I spent a lot of money on this. This is sort of promoted by Sean Foley, the Pro Sender, and this really does task you in a different way to really move your wrists and put pressure on that ball. So I'll review that at some point. And then maybe compare the two. But until I see you next time, keep practicing, stay curious. Good luck, play well.